The Olympics might be over, but in the watch world, Japan has long been at the forefront of our minds. If only case polishing was an Olympic sport, Japan might have come out top on the medals table. These two watches in front of me are what happens when Seiko gets it right. Simply put, one makes quartz seem fun again, and the other possesses the best value for money finishing since Leicester picked up Jamie Vardy from Fleetwood Town for just over £1 million. And to think, they could have bought a green Nautilus with that. Before we get into it today, I'd like to give a shout out to Mark for very generously lending these in. Speaking of generosity, I really do want to thank all of you who've subscribed so far and liked any of the videos I've done. All and any support really is appreciated, and reading your interesting and often very kind comments really puts a smile on my face. My family have barely recognised me. So onto these watches then. Where to start? Well, as Boris Johnson and his Bullingdon Club pals said as the pigs' heads got wheeled in, we'll kind of do them in unison. One is the SPB071J1, a modern recreation of a watch from the 1960s, whilst the other is the SNE499P1, a solar-powered quartz diver that will give small-wristed folk like me as good a chance as any to wear a big, chunky watch. I'll start with the latter, just as I gave one of its bigger brothers, the S23629J1, a bit of a kick in a few weeks ago, and I'm pretty relieved to not be doing that to Mark's solar-powered Tuna here today. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way. The diameter on this I have at 46.9mm, which sounds huge until I tell you that the lug-to-lug is only 45.5mm, so even on my just over 6-inch wrists, it wears very nicely. At 11.8mm in height, it's pretty standard for a 200-metre dive watch, but being quartz, I'd hoped it might have been slimmer. Speaking of the movements, it's the solar-powered V157, which on a full charge can last a healthy 10 months, giving this diver real pick-up-and-go credentials. What's more, with every tick, the second hand hits the marker. There's a date complication which is nicely integrated down at 4 o'clock, and it replaces or acts as one of the indices, rather than cutting into one that's half there and half isn't. The stated accuracy on this is plus or minus 15 seconds a month. Again, this is standard quartz stuff, but you'll often get much healthier numbers than these anyway. And as if these positives weren't enough, Seiko really are spoiling us. This bezel lines up like a North Korean military parade. Cue the nationalistic fanfare. Let's take a listen to the bezel. Okay, so if you've not used the Tuna before, bezel can be a bit of a weird one because it's a bit crunchy, for lack of a better word. Nonetheless, this has the resistance that the previous Tuna I reviewed lacked, and only a tiny bit of backplay. The Lume pip at 12 o'clock down to the 15 marker on the bezel insert are also loomed up, which is something of a novelty. Onto the SPB071J1 air diver then, and before anything else, just look at that funky dial. A red minute hand, a bright white needle second hand, a broad arrow hour hand, and a wavy dial that mean legibility will never become an issue. The splashes of red on the markers at 3, 6, 9 and 12 would have Stanley Kubrick purring. The blue-black fade on the dial is reminiscent of the Rolex Deep Sea, but obviously I'm gutted to allude to the name James Cameron in the same breath as Kubrick, so we'll stop that there. The metallic blue coating used along the edge of the bezel adds to the playful colouring of the piece, and at the risk of sounding like someone trying to justify the existence of the film Avatar, it's just fun. The 43.1mm case is beautifully finished, and the 13.9mm height, while a little tall on paper, doesn't wear so because the case back tends to sort of bed itself into the wrist. Despite the seemingly large dimensions, the 49.9mm lug-to-lug means this avoids looking cumbersome, even on wrists like mine. And once again, the bezel lines up. Let's have a listen to it. Again, like a sex pest being questioned by Emily Mateless, there's a solid amount of resistance. And don't sweat it if you're worried about gripping it. The coin-edge bezel means you'll be able to use it whether you're in a helicopter over the Falklands or just having an American hot down Pizza Express. American hot is the name of the pizza, not some sort of code name for anyone, okay? Speaking of screwing, both watches have an unsigned screw down crown, and that's as good a place as any to talk about the not so good. Well, yeah, like that one son wanted by the FBI for historical sex offences, the crown is let down somewhat here. The action is smooth and easy, and the knurling is nice and grippy, but I just wish that Seiko had signed it with an S or perhaps even the Prospex branding, given that these are both special editions, whatever that means these days, rather than just giving us this sort of off-the-shelf, unbranded alternative. And while the sapphire crystal on the SPB071J1 is beautifully domed on the inside, creating some mesmerising distortion at certain angles, this Tuna only has a hardlex mineral crystal, naturally vulnerable to scratches and the like, so if you're prone to banging things you shouldn't, probably best avoided. Did you hear that, Andrew? My final niggle with both of these is the strap, or rather the length of them. I get that some people will be wearing these with a wetsuit, but surely most will be using them to look like they don a wetsuit at the weekend and explore the coral reefs off of, Hull? They're a bit too long, and a second keeper really would be a godsend here, as the strap juts out and makes what is a very cool piece a bit unsightly underneath. Never unsightly on a Seiko is the Lume, and as you can see here, both have two-tone Lume bright on the hands and indices, so whether you're lying awake at night thinking about how many trips to Pizza Express constitute an alibi, or you plunge in the depths of common decency with a few dodgy mates from the New York socialite scene, these watches have you covered whatever heart of darkness you're wandering into. Plummeting those murky depths inevitably leads us to money. The prices of both here are pretty competitive, with the Air Diver coming in at £899 and the Tuna at £369, or $1,100 and around $510 respectively. But you are likely to find discounts on both of these. While I think the Tuna is priced somewhat fairly for a well-spec'd diver, regrettably without that sapphire crystal that so many of us crave, I think the Air Diver's price is a bit steep. As you can see from this readout, the 6R movement in the back is running well within the stated tolerances of -15 to +25 seconds a day, but you can pick up watches with much more accurate movements from Swatch Group brands like Hamilton, Tissot or Certina for a fraction of the price of this Seiko, and I think consumers are starting to realise this. Plus, you get the added confidence with those of having Swiss made on the dial, whether you feel that's a marketing ploy or not. However, despite those hang-ups, I'm thoroughly relieved to be able to recommend these watches, as Seiko occupies a very special place in my heart. You see, the Seiko Sea Urchin was my first automatic watch, as I've pointed out before, and handling watches from the brand costing far more but offering far less in terms of quality control is always a disappointment. Thanks to Mark then for lending these in and reminding us all that when Seiko gets it right, it really gets it right. If you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified every time I upload? Spoiler alert, it's about once or twice a week. But if I reach 1,000 subscribers, I'll be providing anybody who wants one a foolproof alibi related to a restaurant chain of their choice that will throw those pesky state prosecutors off the scent. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.